Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers, where quiet questions echo through darkened rooms and strange truths unfold like old maps in candlelight. Tonight's story begins not with an answer, but with a riddle. If every part of something changes, piece by piece, moment by moment, is it still the same thing? If every cell in a body is replaced, every thought rewritten, every belief reshaped by time and memory, then what remains? What is this thing called self that feels so solid, so certain, yet shifts in silence like the tide? Is identity a core or a current, a fixed star or a flickering flame? Plato hinted at this centuries ago with the story of the ship of Theseus, a ship repaired plank by plank until no original piece remained. Was it still Theseus's ship? And if the old planks were used to build another, which one carried the true identity? The paradox still haunts modern minds, but not just as a question about wood and vessels. It creeps into the mirror, into the voice remembered on an old tape, into photographs that no longer match the person holding them. Memory fails gently, cells die quietly, habits change without notice, and yet the sentence "I am me" never seems to hesitate. But what is that me? A collection of thoughts, a name, a face. Every few years, the body rebuilds itself completely. Not one cell remains. The voice deepens. The bones shift. The brain rewires itself in silence. Is the man in the mirror still the boy from old photos? Or only something shaped in the likeness of continuity? The illusion of self is sticky, like dew on glass. It clings, but underneath it, something stirs, a quiet truth that feels both eerie and freeing. Neuroscience joins the whisper. Studies reveal that the mind constructs identity like a story, assembling moments, sensations, preferences, and beliefs into a tapestry of selfhood. But stories change, narratives twist. Even memory, once thought sacred, proves unreliable. Every recall is a rewrite. Every recollection alters the past, so the mind does not remember, it reimagines. The self, then, is not a statue. It is a novel being written mid-sentence, and yet the mind resists this. It prefers the comfort of anchors, labels, names, the sense of being one continuous thread. But beneath this comfort lies a stranger, unfixed, unknown, always becoming. Buddhist philosophy knew this long before science caught up. It called the self an illusion, a useful fiction, a construct born from craving, from clinging, from the refusal to see impermanence. In the quiet halls of Zen, monks meditated not to discover who they were, but to dissolve the question entirely. The goal was not identity, but emptiness, not self-knowledge, but self-vanishing. And still something in the heart tightens at the thought, to not be someone. But what if that's the doorway to peace? The ancient Tao teases gently. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. But what is the self to be mastered if it slips like water through the fingers? Perhaps power lies not in control, but in surrender, in allowing identity to dissolve like mist at dawn. Consider the voice inside the mind, the inner narrator. It speaks in words, often using the first person. I want this. I remember that. I am afraid. But that voice is not the thinker. It is just another thought, a habit of language, a looping echo. The real awareness lies deeper, quieter, behind the voice, listening, always listening. And that listener? It has no name, no face, no story. It is the stillness between thoughts, the space where identity loses form. And in that space there is peace, there is also terror. Because to lose the self is to lose the anchor, the map, the myth. But maps are not the territory, and myths are not the truth. This is the paradox. The self feels real, it feels unchanging, but it changes completely. And still, it clings to the illusion of continuity. The paradox proves something quietly devastating. You are not who you think, because thinking itself creates the you. Stop the thoughts and where are you? Drop the story and what remains? This is not a riddle to be solved, but a question to sit with. Like a candle burning through the night, offering no heat, but just enough light to unsettle. Who then is watching this thought? Who is reading these words in the dark? The mind clings to stories the way vines cling to stone walls, reaching for shape, for meaning, for continuity in the quiet chaos of existence. And so it tells the story of a self, layer by layer, year after year, as if this fragile structure were built on rock rather than water. But water it is, shifting softly with time, bending beneath memory, curling around suggestion. Memory too betrays its master. It does not preserve, it edits. It folds old truths into newer ones. It changes tone. It erases, highlights, rearranges. A favourite childhood toy, once cherished, now seems dull and unfamiliar in the attic. The smell is gone, the thrill forgotten. Was the feeling ever real, or only the memory of a memory? We remember emotions more than facts. We recall the sensation, but not the scene. And from this fabric of emotional echoes, the self is stitched, yet the thread frays. Experiments show this quietly. A person asked to recall an event from 10 years ago will, over time, replace true details with imagined ones, borrowed from photos, stories, films, dreams. But the confidence remains, the certainty of I remember. And that certainty is the mask. In ancient Greece, the word persona meant mask. It was not the face, but the role played by the actor. So too is the modern self, a role, a voice, a mask worn for survival, worn so long it forgets it is wearing anything at all. The psychologist Carl Jung whispered about this gently. He called it the persona, the social self, the part designed not for truth, but for belonging. Behind it, he said, lies the shadow, the unlived self, the truths denied, the parts buried in silence. Most live their whole lives as their mask. They polish it, protect it, name it, defend it. But it is still a mask, still a role. And the actor, long forgotten. To find the actor is to enter dangerous territory, for it requires turning away from applause, from names, from mirrors. It means silence, long silence, and in that silence, a stranger waits. Not someone new, but someone ancient, someone watching from the beginning. In the East, this is called the witness, the silent observer behind thought and form. It cannot be hurt, for it does not act. It cannot be praised, for it does not speak. It only watches, softly, eternally. Most never notice it. The noise of thought is too loud, the chatter of the ego too constant. But in moments of stillness, just before sleep, just after waking, in deep meditation, the witness peeks through. A flash of awareness with no story, no shape, no need. It feels like peace but deeper, like absence but full. That, say the mystics, is the true self. Or rather, it is what remains when the false self is gone. This is not a truth to believe, but one to sense, like the way still water feels different from stirred. When the mind quiets, something deeper stirs. The mystic Ramana Maharshi asked a single question: who am I? Not to be answered with words, but to be held like a flame. Each time the mind answers, I am a man, I am a woman, I am a teacher, I am a failure, he would say, but who knows this? The question burns the mask, and what survives the fire cannot be named, but it watches, it listens, it waits. This is the core of the paradox. The self that claims to be you is not fixed, not solid, not permanent. It is built from borrowed parts, genes, memories, traumas, dreams. But the one who watches it all unfold, that presence, it is untouched. And strangely, that untouched presence has no opinion, no identity. It simply is. So who are you? The thoughts that speak, or the space they echo through? The body that ages, or the awareness that notices age? The person with a name, or the silence beneath the name. This is not a crisis, it is a candle. Let it flicker in the darkness. Let it show how little is needed to feel whole. For wholeness is not built, it is uncovered. An identity, like dust, must be gently blown away before the mirror can reflect what was always there. Quiet, watching, free. Most live as though the self is a container, holding traits and memories like stones in a jar. But what if it is not a jar at all, but a stream? And what if identity is not the water, but the shimmer of light upon it, beautiful, temporary, untouchable? A man walks into a room and forgets why he came. He stares at the walls, confused. In that moment, where is the self? Was it tied to the intention, now vanished? Or does it drift with the forgetfulness lost in the folds of silence? Neuroscience offers a quiet nudge here. It shows how the brain does not store identity in one place. There is no single seat of the self. Memory is scattered. Emotion is scattered. Personality too. What feels like one I is a network, not a point. A chorus, not a solo. And that chorus changes tune depending on context. Around some people, kindness rises. Around others, defensiveness. In solitude, perhaps wisdom. In stress, perhaps cruelty. So which version is real? The kind one? The cruel one? Or neither? Perhaps identity is not a solid form, but a shifting lens. Like a prism rotating in light, casting different colours depending on angle and source. Some colours we like, some we hide, but the prism never stops turning. In psychology, this is known as context-dependent identity. We are not one self, we are many. And the voice inside that says this is who I am is often just the loudest one at the moment. The philosopher David Hume felt this centuries ago. He searched for a core self, a thing behind the thoughts, and found none. Only perceptions flickering, passing, never still. He wrote, I never can catch myself without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. So where then is the self? If not in thought, not in memory, not in body, where? Some find this unsettling, others find it liberating. For if the self is not fixed, it can be remade. If it is not true, it cannot be broken. If it is not owned, it cannot be stolen. Identity then becomes less a possession and more a poem, rewritten daily, read differently each time, and never truly finished. But if there is no fixed self, how do we make decisions? How do we hold values? Where do we ground morality, love, loyalty? Here lies another paradox. Even illusions can be meaningful. A rainbow does not touch the ground, but it moves us. A dream dissolves at waking, but it can change a life. Identity, though illusory, is still useful. It helps us navigate, speak, connect. But when mistaken for truth, it becomes a trap. It becomes the prison that Plato warned of, the cave where shadows are mistaken for reality. The illusion only becomes dangerous when it is no longer seen as illusion. To know it is a dream is to begin waking, and waking does not mean abandoning the self, but holding it gently, like a paper lantern in the dark, beautiful, delicate, glowing for a moment. Some traditions teach not that the self must be destroyed, but softened, thinned, made transparent, so the light of awareness can shine through. The more tightly one clings to identity, the more fragile life becomes. Every insult cuts deeper, every change feels like death. But when identity is held loosely, there is room to grow, to change, to forgive. Forgiveness, after all, is impossible for a rigid self. Only the fluid can flow past hurt. Only the spacious can hold contradictions. And humans are full of contradiction. Kindness and cruelty, confidence and fear, desire and detachment. These opposites do not cancel. They coexist, just like waves in water. To accept them is to stop fighting the tide. The self is not a sword to sharpen, but a river to observe, and perhaps, someday, to join. For beyond the paradox of identity lies something quieter still. Not a concept, not a thought, but a presence. One that does not change when the mind changes. One that does not speak when the voice inside speaks. One that remains, like a still lake beneath the storm, always waiting, always watching, and it does not need a name. A candle flickers on a windowsill. Outside, the world shifts in moonlight. Inside, the air is still, and thought moves like dust, soft and slow. In this silence, the question returns, who is it that watches thought rise and fall? Not the thinker, for thought does not need a thinker, just as wind does not need a blower. Thought arises like mist over a pond. It appears, lingers, fades. The self claims it, says I thought this, but the truth is quieter. The thought itself. And awareness simply noticed. Awareness does not choose what appears. It does not sculpt the mind. It does not steer the stream. It only sees. But seeing is not passive. It is the origin of freedom. For what is seen can be softened. What is observed can be changed. But what is mistaken for truth remains rigid, defended, feared. Most people fear change, not because they hate the new, but because they cling to a story of who they are. Change threatens the story. And stories are comforting, even painful ones. I am broken, I am unlucky, I am unworthy. These identities, though cruel, feel safe because they are familiar. And familiarity, not truth, is what the brain seeks. This is the trap. The mind confuses comfort for clarity. It prefers the known lie to the unknown truth. This is why people repeat patterns even when they hurt. They become loyal to the mask, loyal to the myth. In psychology, this is called ego identification, the fusion of awareness with story. The mind believes the voice inside it is who it is, but that voice is not the self. It is a narrator, sometimes helpful, often wrong, always loud. The self beneath the voice is quiet. So quiet it is often missed entirely. In the ancient Upanishads, the sages described this self as the Atman, the innermost essence, beyond form, beyond thought. It is not something that can be seen, they said. It is the seer. It cannot be heard. It is the hearer. It cannot be thought. It is the thinker. And it cannot be grasped, for it grasps all. These words are not meant to be understood quickly. They are not instructions, but invitations. Invitations to turn inward, not to find something new, but to notice what has always been. The one who has watched every age, every heartbreak, every dream, the self that does not age, that does not break, that does not sleep. And here another paradox appears. To know the true self, one must forget the known self. To find what is most real, one must unlearn what feels most familiar. Unlearning is harder than learning. It asks not for addition, but subtraction. Not for effort, but surrender. Not for answers, but silence. Silence is the teacher the ego fears most. In silence, its stories cannot breathe. Its roles dissolve, its titles vanish. And what remains? Stillness, spaciousness, peace. Not the peace of achievement, but the peace of return. Return to what? Not a place, not a belief, but a presence. The one watching now, the one who watched even before there were words. This is not abstract, it is immediate, close as breath, quiet as night. And yet, the mind resists. It says, this is too simple, or this cannot be it. It searches for a technique, a book, a guru. But the presence waits, not in books, not in teachers, but in the moment between two thoughts. That soft pause, that breath without effort, that flicker of awareness before a name is spoken. There in that pause the illusion fades and something vast stirs, something without edge, without past, without future. And yet it is more intimate than thought, more constant than mood. It was here before the first memory, and it will remain after the last. This is the self the mystics whisper of, not the personal self, not the name, but the nameless, the watcher, the witness. the awareness through which the idea of self comes and goes like a dream dissolving at dawn. To sit with this is not to understand it, but to remember, to return, to rest. There is a mirror in the mind, but it does not reflect the world. It reflects belief. And belief, like fog, clouds the glass. A child looks into it and sees a hero. A teenager sees a flaw. An adult sees a role, but never the mirror itself. Always the reflection. And so the self becomes what is seen, not what is real, but what is imagined. What is imagined becomes remembered. What is remembered becomes believed, and what is believed becomes identity. But belief is not truth, it is repetition. The mind learns by habit, and habit, not evidence, builds certainty. This is the illusion that shapes the self, that if something feels true, it must be. But feelings follow patterns, and patterns follow exposure. The more something is seen, the more it feels familiar, and the more familiar it feels, the more true it seems. This is the illusory truth effect. A phrase heard often enough becomes belief, even if it's false, especially if it's false. The brain does not seek truth, it seeks safety, and safety often hides in the known. So people cling to their old stories, even painful ones. I'm not good enough, I always fail, no one loves me. These were never facts, they were echoes that grew louder with time until they sounded like truth. The philosopher Kierkegaard called this despair, not sadness, but the deep suffering of being trapped in a false self, a self built on comparison, expectation, and fear. He wrote of the sickness unto death, the illness of the soul that forgets itself, forgets it is more than the reflection. But how does one remember? By turning inward. Not to the thought, but to the thinker. Not to the voice, but to the silence it emerges from. The mirror must be cleaned. Not with effort, but with stillness. Let the fog settle. Let the noise drift. Let the stories be still. And in that stillness, a different kind of knowing arises. Not a thought, but a feeling. Not a concept, but a presence. The feeling of being. Just being. Without identity. Without definition. Without need. This is not the self the world sees. It is the self before the world was named. Some call it consciousness. Some call it spirit. Some call it nothing. But it does not care for names. It only is. It only watches. And in its watching there is peace, not peace as pleasure, but peace as absence. Absence of struggle, absence of selfing, absence of noise. When the mirror is clear, there is no image, no role, no story. Just space, just light. And this light does not say I am. It simply shines. This is the truth the paradox reveals, that there is no fixed you, and yet something watches, something silent, something whole. To mistake the reflection for the watcher is the root of all confusion. But to see the mirror for what it is, to feel its clarity, is to awaken. Not as someone new, but as someone empty. Empty like the sky, still like the sea. And in this emptiness, there is room for everything. Joy can come, sorrow can come, loss can come, but they pass like weather. They do not cling, they do not stain, they do not define. For the self is not what happens, it is what notices. It is not the wave, it is the ocean, always moving, never moved. And once this is glimpsed, even for a moment, the story loses power. The mask loosens, the roles soften, and the world feels less like a battle, more like a dance. Not a dance to win, but a dance to witness, to feel, to let go, to begin again. Beneath all names is a silence that never learned to speak. It does not care for language. It does not crave recognition. It is not moved by praise nor wounded by insult. It simply watches, and it watches without eyes. The one who says I am is not the one who is. The voice is a mask, a dream, a shimmer on the surface, but the depths remain still. In dreams, identity shifts without warning. One moment a child, the next a stranger. Emotions bloom and vanish, Time bends, faces melt into others, and still the dream feels real until waking. What if waking life is only another dream? A longer one, a steadier rhythm, but still illusion. The Tibetan mystics thought so. They called ordinary life the waking dream, no more real than sleep. And they trained not to wake, but to stay aware within the illusion, to see the dream as dream. The brain, in its quiet architecture, cannot distinguish reality from imagination without effort. If a lie is told often enough, the brain begins to treat it as memory. If a fear is rehearsed repeatedly, the body begins to suffer as if it were true. This is not weakness, it is design. The mind is not a truth-seeking machine, it is a survival tool, and survival favours pattern over reality, familiarity over fact, comfort over clarity. So the self it builds is not real, it is useful. A scaffolding, a costume, a story told to reduce chaos. But stories must end. And when they do, what remains is not absence, but presence. The philosopher Alan Watts said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The self cannot be seen because it is not a thing. It is the seeing itself. Try to find the edge of it. Try to locate its beginning. The moment it is caught, it slips away. This is not failure. This is the nature of self. It is not an object, it is the subject, and the subject cannot observe itself directly. It can only rest in awareness. It can only be. In modern neuroscience, experiments show that the brain initiates actions before the mind becomes conscious of deciding. A hand moves, then the thought arises, I chose this, but the choice was already made. The voice claiming authorship is an afterthought, a storyteller arriving after the plot has begun. This is not science fiction. It is the quiet disintegration of agency. If choice is not chosen, then who chooses? If thought is not directed, then who thinks? The answer is not another thought. It is the falling away of the question. When the mind stops searching, a space opens. In that space, the self is no longer a thing to be known, but a knowing without content. And in that knowing, there is no fear, no striving, no name, just being. Some call this enlightenment, others call it nonsense, but those who touch it do not argue. They grow quiet. They smile more. They speak less of identity and more of presence, less of becoming, more of being. The old self does not vanish in a blaze, it softens like wax near flame. It melts, and from that melting, something gentler rises. A self that no longer needs to prove, to defend, to grasp. A self that is not a self, but an openness. A sky without horizon. A mirror with no reflection. This is not a destination. It is always here, always now. But the mind must grow still enough to see. Like dust settling in water. Like night falling on a restless city. Slowly, silently, deeply. The question is not who am I, but what is this? What is this breath, rising and falling like waves on a sleeping shore? What is this quiet witness, behind the eyes unmoved by the passing clouds of mood and memory? The body changes, the thoughts change, the beliefs shift like sand in wind. But the watcher remains, always there, always still. In ancient Advaita philosophy, the sages spoke of neti, not this, not that. They peeled back every layer of identity, not the body, not the mind, not the emotion, not the name, not the thought, and what remained was pure awareness. Not personal, not describable, only present. The modern world fears such stillness. It rushes to name, to define, to brand the self like a product, measurable and fixed, a personality type, a star sign, a diagnosis. But the soul slips through such fingers. It cannot be charted, it cannot be boxed, it is not a thing. It is the space between things. Even the word soul is a shadow of what it tries to point to. For language, though beautiful, is also a trap. It slices wholeness into categories. It turns mystery into label, and labels cling. They harden into prisons. A child hears you're shy and carries it like a tattoo. A teenager hears you're not smart and builds a life around avoidance. A person hears this is who you are and forgets they are more than any sentence spoken over them. The mind craves these labels. They make the world seem safe, but safety is not truth. Truth is raw, wordless, alive, and to touch it, the self must die. Not in fear, but in surrender. Surrender to the mystery that was always watching. Some fear this as loss, but what is lost? Only the mask, only the story, only the illusion of control. What remains is the real, the untouched, the unborn. And it does not scream, it whispers through intuition, through art, through moments of awe. It whispers through stillness, through grief, through love without condition. These moments are not taught, they are remembered. Like something known before birth, like a melody heard in a dream. And when they arise, the self vanishes. The thinker pauses, the doer dissolves, and all that remains is being. Pure, soft, endless being. This is the state mystics called union, yoga, samadhi. It is not a trance, not a vision. It is ordinary awareness, seen clearly, like mist lifting from a mirror. The reflection no longer mistaken for the face. The sky no longer filled with clouds. And even when the clouds return, as they always do, something has changed. The illusion is seen through. The self is held more lightly. The thoughts pass with less weight. The voice of the ego, once so loud, now just another bird singing in a vast forest. Not wrong, not bad, just not the whole truth. The whole truth cannot be spoken. It can only be lived. It can only be felt, like the hush before dawn, the stillness before breath. And in that stillness, the paradox returns. There is no self, and yet there is awareness. There is no one, and yet everything is seen. The one who tries to understand this will never succeed. But the one who lets go will know, not in words, in silence. A river does not ask where it ends, it simply flows. Around stones, through forests, beneath bridges. It moves without question, without identity. It does not say, I am a river, it simply is. The self too, when left untouched, flows. It feels, it moves, it sees. But when grasped, it hardens. When named, it forgets. When possessed, it divides. And in that division, suffering begins. The ancient sages of the Tao whispered this truth in poems and paradox. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The self that can be named is not the true self. Naming it reduces it to an object. And the self is never an object. It is the subject of all experience. The one thing that cannot be seen, because it is the seeing itself. This may sound mystical, but it is not. It is the most ordinary thing. So ordinary that it is overlooked. Like water to a fish, like air to the lungs. It is not found in books, it is not found in thought, it is found in the pause between. In the gap. In the breath that is not noticed until it stops. Most chase identity as if it were gold. But gold is heavy, and identity, once clung to, becomes a burden. The stronger the identity, the easier it is to wound. The more tightly held the story, the more fragile the piece. But loosen the grip, and something soft returns. A lightness, a curiosity, a space to be many things, or nothing at all. The self is not a statue to preserve, it is a garden to tend. Seasons change, leaves fall, flowers bloom, then wither, and yet the soil remains, rich, quiet, waiting. To confuse the flowers with the ground is to mistake the mask for the face. In therapy, identity is sometimes called a narrative construct, the stories we tell about who we are, shaped by memory, culture, trauma. But every story has a narrator, and the narrator is not the story. It is the space in which stories arise. In dreams, one can become anyone. In a single night, a dozen identities may pass through the same sleeping mind, and the dreamer never doubts. What changes is the form. What remains is the awareness. Even waking life, when seen clearly, is no different. We are different people in different rooms. A child with parents, a leader with peers, a stranger in the mirror. So which is real? Or are all masks on the same face? The Zen masters laughed at the question. They asked, "Before your parents were born, who were you?" The question cannot be answered with thought. It must be lived in silence. It must be felt in stillness. And when the answer comes, it is not a sentence. It is a peace, a surrender, not to defeat, but to truth. The truth that self is not an object, not a thought, not a name, but the field in which all these arise. A sky too wide to grasp, a silence too deep to disturb. The paradox proves this gently. The more one tries to become someone, the more one forgets what they already are. And what they are is not a role, not a title, not a personality. What they are is this seeing, this being, this breath, without story, without edge, without end. A clock ticks in a quiet room, but time does not move. Only the hands shift, only the numbers change. The present remains, untouched, unmoved, unnoticed. The self too exists in this stillness, but imagines it is moving, aging, striving, evolving. Yet all motion is illusion in the mirror of awareness. The past is memory, the future is thought, and the self that travels through them is a phantom, built from fragments of imagination and habit. A memory is not the past, it is a present thought that mimics a shape once felt, and thought is not the future. It is a present echo painted with hopes or fears. So what walks through time? What continues from one breath to the next? The child becomes the adult becomes the elder becomes ash, and still the inner voice says, "I am." But what is this I that claims such continuity when the flesh is remade, the thoughts rewritten, the feelings redrawn 1,000 times? The Buddhists called this the illusion of permanence. They saw the self as a river made of ripples. Nothing stable, nothing fixed, just pattern and change and echo. And yet, because the change is gradual, the illusion of sameness holds. Like watching stars move across the sky so slowly that stillness is mistaken for truth. But stare long enough, and even stars drift, even mountains erode, even names fade. So too with identity. It clings like fog to a name, a face, a voice, but it cannot grasp its own root. Because the root is not in time. It is in awareness. And awareness is not a moment, it is the stage upon which moments appear. The philosopher Heraclitus once wrote that no man ever steps in the same river twice. But what if the man is also a river? What if the self is not the one who steps, but the stepping? Not the observer, but the flow? There is comfort in believing in continuity, that the person who spoke yesterday is the same as the one speaking now, that the promises made last year still bind today, that the hand on a lover's face is the same hand that once reached for a childhood toy. But this comfort, too, is illusion. The continuity is not in the form, but in the pattern. Like waves in water, like fire flickering in wind, the shape changes, but the rhythm remains. So the self is not a thing, it is a dance, a becoming, a verb pretending to be a noun. And the mind, ever eager to define, carves this movement into statues of identity. I am shy, I am strong, I am broken, I am worthy. But these are not truths, they are temporary clouds, shaped by mood, weather, memory. Let them pass, watch them drift, do not name them, do not own them, for naming is the beginning of attachment, and attachment is the root of suffering. The Taoists knew this. They spoke of the uncarved block, the nameless source, the original face before birth. To return to that is not to regress, but to remember. Remember what the self was before it learned to be someone, before the masks, before the mirrors, before the voice inside said, "This is me." Even now, beneath the noise, it waits. A silence older than thought, a stillness that has never been touched by fear or time. It is not reached by effort. It is not gained through doing. It is uncovered when all else is dropped, when striving ends, when identity is allowed to dissolve, like salt in water. What remains is not nothing. It is not absence. It is presence, pure and full. The presence that watches the mind without judgment, that sees the sadness rise and fall without drowning in it, that hears the thoughts without believing them. This presence is not owned. It cannot be improved or perfected. It is already whole, already enough, and it is the same in all beings. One light seen through many lamps. The mystics knew this too. They called it the divine spark, the silent witness, the unchanging ground. And they whispered that to know it is not to become more, but to become less, to become nobody, to become open, to let go of all that is not true, and in that letting go to find what was never lost. The paradox proves it softly. The more one clings to identity, the further one drifts from truth. But in surrender, the self becomes what it was always meant to be, not a person, not a role, but a space, a silence, a light, watching, waiting, free. A man sits alone in a darkened room, the hum of the world hushed beyond the window, the slow rhythm of his breath, the only sound he can feel. He wonders who he is, not in the shallow way one wonders what to eat or where to go, but in the ancient way, bone deep, wordless, full of weight. The question has no shape, but it presses like gravity on the ribs. Who am I, really? Not the name, not the voice, not the roles that shift like clouds through the day. Something beneath that, something still. The mind offers answers. I am a father. I am a friend. I am someone who likes tea. But these answers float on the surface and he feels it. How flimsy they are when night falls and the masks are set down beside the bed. In dreams, he becomes other people. He speaks with voices he's never known. He dies, he wakes. So who then is dreaming? Who continues through the changing? The philosophers of old asked the same. Descartes, peering into doubt, declared, "I think, therefore I am." But others questioned even that. Thought is not always chosen. It appears, it pulses, it drifts. So what if the I is not the thinker, but the awareness in which the thinking happens? What if thought is not proof of self, but only a wave on deeper water? The sages of India pointed inward, saying the self is not the body, not the thought, not the emotion, but the seer of all these, the one who watches the dream and does not wake when the dream ends. And this seer, they said, is not personal. It does not carry a name. It does not favour a gender. It does not age or grieve. It only watches. And through that watching, the world appears. But the world, too, is not solid. It is painted on the canvas of perception, shaped by senses that can lie, memory that edits, emotions that colour. A face once loved becomes a stranger. A room once feared becomes a home. What changed? Not the world, only the self, or rather, the sense of self. Because the self, when grasped, vanishes, like a shadow touched by light. It cannot be held. It cannot be found in mirrors or journals or long walks beneath the stars. It is not a thing. It is the opening in which all things rise and pass. Like wind through trees, it moves without being moved. And this is why the sages smile. Because what is most true cannot be explained, only felt. Felt in silence, felt in stillness, felt in the moment between thoughts, when nothing is wanted and nothing is resisted. That is when it flickers, this presence behind the mask, this vastness beneath the name. It cannot be improved, it cannot be broken, it does not seek, it does not cling, it is already free. And it has always been here, even when forgotten. Even when buried beneath years of identity and noise, it waits, like a mountain beneath the mist, like a sky behind the clouds. And when glimpsed, even for a breath, the heart softens. The mind bows, the striving pauses. For what was being searched for was never elsewhere. It was never in the next book, the next lover, the next version of the self. It was always this awareness, this isness. And once seen, everything changes, yet nothing does. The world still turns, the body still aches, the stories still whisper, but they no longer stick, they no longer define. They are held like leaves in a river, lightly, lovingly, without grasping. And this is the freedom no one can give or take, the freedom of no longer needing to be someone, the freedom of resting as the space in which someone appears. The man in the darkened room breathes again. The question fades, not because it was answered, but because it dissolved. Like salt in water, like smoke in wind. And what remains is not a conclusion, not a discovery, but a return, a homecoming without walls, a silence that needs no echo, a self that is not a self, yet is more real than anything he ever named. There is a place within the mind where language thins and the world turns quiet, where the names of things lose their weight and only the being remains. No roles, no edges, just the soft hum of existence itself, breathing through the body like wind through hollow bone. And in this place, questions soften too. They do not ask for answers. They only linger, like the warmth of someone long gone, like the echo of a bell after it's been struck. The question of self becomes not a riddle to solve, but a veil to see through. Who am I? Not a noun, not a label, not a fixed image on paper, but a shifting field, a living mirror, a quiet eye that never blinks. The thinker thinks it owns the thoughts, but thought arises unbidden. It floats, it dances, it fades. The thinker is only the echo claiming credit. The body believes it is the self, but bodies change, they grow, they ache, they die. Yet even as they dissolve, something remains, something watching, still and unchanged, as if made not of time but of presence itself. The mystics called this the groundless ground, the untouched source, the one behind the many, and they said it cannot be seen because it is the seeing. It cannot be named because it is what names arise within. It cannot be known as object because it is the subject behind all knowing. And yet it is not separate, it is not far, it is not hidden. It is only overlooked, like silence beneath music, like the screen behind the film. The self people defend is not real. It is a bundle of memories, habits, expectations, a mask passed down from culture, from trauma, from repetition. But the one who sees the mask, that one is real. That one does not speak. It listens, it does not try. It allows, it does not become. It is. And in its stillness, everything is held. Grief, joy, boredom, longing. Nothing is rejected. Nothing is clung to. All is seen, like clouds moving across the open sky of awareness. This is the secret that sits in plain sight, that freedom is not in becoming more. It is in seeing what has always been. The self that was there before the first thought, before the first word, before the first mirror, told a child how to look. In that moment, before reflection, there was no identity. Only presence, only openness. And this is not a loss, it is not a stripping away. It is a return, a remembering, not of information, but of being. Being without boundary, without grasping, without fear. And from that being, love flows. Not love as emotion, but love as recognition. The kind of love that sees no other, that knows all forms as waves on the same sea, all selves as masks on the same face. The philosopher Schopenhauer hinted at this, quietly, beneath his bleakness. He saw that the world as will, the grasping, striving, hungering force, could be transcended only through the quiet eye that no longer needs, that no longer clings, that no longer says, I am this, I must have that, I must become more. And when that eye opens, what it sees is not an improved version of self. It sees through the illusion entirely. It rests in the witness, in the watcher, in the still flame that does not flicker, no matter how wild the wind becomes. The paradox, then, is not just that the self is not who we think. It's that the self we are is beyond all thinking, beyond all naming, beyond all owning, and in the face of that, the mind grows quiet. The striving loses taste, the defences fall. What's left is this breath, this awareness, this moment. Nothing else is needed, because in this stillness, the whole sky fits, and the one who sees it has no name, no form, no story. Only this quiet joy, only this soft light, only this watching, always free. A lantern glows in a hallway, long forgotten, its flame soft and patient, untouched by time. Dust floats through the air like tiny stars, and the silence here is not empty but full, as if the walls themselves remember something no words can hold. In this stillness the question returns, not as a puzzle, not as fear, but as a gentle presence pressing at the edge of thought. What am I, if not this body, not this mind, not this flickering sense of self that vanishes each night in sleep and reforms each morning from memory? Each time the eyes open, the story resumes, as if uninterrupted. Yet in sleep, where is the self? Where does it go when dreams slip into darkness and no thoughts remain? The answer cannot be spoken, only felt. Felt in the quiet awareness that never sleeps, that watches even when the dream dissolves. This awareness is not a person. It has no opinion, no face, no voice. It does not speak in language, it does not care for name, and yet it knows, not facts, not details, but being, pure and steady. The mind resists this. It wants definition, it wants edges, it wants to be something solid. But the truth is not solid, it is soft, like mist, like moonlight, like the hush before dawn. The ancient texts knew this. In the Chandogya Upanishad, a father tells his son, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that being which cannot be described, that light within all things, that presence behind all faces. And the son does not understand at first. How could he? The mind cannot grasp what it is not. But slowly, through silence, through simplicity, the knowing returns. Not as knowledge, but as recognition. A sense of, yes, this is what I've always been. Before the fear, before the striving, before the endless reaching towards something already here. Even now, behind these words, that awareness listens, not the mind reading, but the space in which the reading happens. That is the paradox. The self believed to be the centre is only a surface. The true centre is not in thought. It is in the background, in the silence, in the still gaze that never blinks. And that gaze is not separate. It is the same in all. Not similar, not related. The same. The same light through different windows. The same ocean through different waves. The ego, sensing this, grows uneasy. It wants to be special. It wants to be known. But awareness does not compete. It does not compare. It simply sees. And in its seeing, everything softens. The war ends. The mask slips. And what remains is peace, not the peace of victory. The peace of no longer needing to fight. Of no longer needing to become. Because there is nothing to become. There is only what already is. And that is enough, more than enough, beyond the body. Beyond the name, beyond the rise and fall of emotions and memories. There is this flame, this presence, this still point that does not move when the world spins. It does not age, it does not break. It watches birth, it watches death. It watches dreams begin and end. And it asks nothing. It only shines. This is why the mystics wept in silence, why the saints smiled without reason, why the poets wrote of love that had no object. Because they touch this truth beneath all other truths, this presence beneath all selves. It does not shout, it does not demand, it waits, gently, eternally. And when noticed, even for a breath, it brings everything home. The masks fall, the striving fades, and the self, once thought to be a fortress, is revealed to be a sky. Open, quiet, infinite. Somewhere deep in the folds of sleep, there is a space without faces, without forms, without names, a space where there is no one watching, yet everything is seen, no one dreaming, yet the dream continues. In that place the self dissolves like ink in water, and what remains is not blankness, not absence, but a silent fullness that holds no story. When the eyes open again, the mind returns to its familiar scaffolding, memories stitched into shape, emotions tied to events, a name placed gently at the centre of the stage. The self reassembles. But like sand poured into a mould, it holds no fixed shape of its own. It is given form by habit, given weight by attention. It is not found, it is made, and each time it is made, it forgets that it is made. This forgetting is subtle. It happens in the background, behind the hum of daily thought. The illusion of selfhood grows not from what is true, but from what is repeated. I am this, I like that, I don't belong, I must succeed. Each thought a thread, each thread a net. And the more it is believed, the more real it seems. But the net is not the sea, and the self is not the thought. Beneath the repetition lies something deeper, something untouched by belief. A presence that does not think in words or move through time. It does not begin. It does not end. It watches. That watching is the key. It is always there, behind the noise, behind the voice, inside the voice, the silence beneath the narrative. And it is not small. It is vast, not empty, spacious, like the sky before the first bird, like the ocean before the first wave. The psychologist William James once wrote of the stream of consciousness, a continuous flow of experience. But even a stream flows through something. What holds the stream? What sees the stream? That question cannot be answered with language. It must be felt, tasted in stillness, known in the breath between thoughts, the breath that asks for nothing, expects nothing, just is. That is where the illusion cracks, where the mirror of identity reveals itself to be made of mist. The self, so long defended, turns out to be porous, shifting, transparent. And strangely, this is not frightening. It is freeing, because what was defended was never under threat. What was clung to was never real. The ego which feared its own death was guarding a dream. And when the dream fades, what remains is not loss, it is peace. A quiet so deep it rings like a bell through the soul. A recognition that nothing was ever missing, that everything that ever mattered was already here. This is the paradox the philosophers touched with trembling hands. That to know the self is to see that there is no self to know. Only presence, only now. And now is not a moment. It is the space in which all moments rise and fall. It does not pass, it holds, it contains. And in that holding, the mind is no longer centre. It becomes a ripple, a flicker, a dream within a dream. The centre shifts, or rather, it vanishes. And what's left is this breath, this light, this softness, this stillness. It cannot be earned, it cannot be lost, it cannot be improved. It is not reached by striving, only by stopping. Stopping the search, stopping the story, letting go of the grip. And in that letting go, the truth appears. Quiet, gentle, unshakable. It does not say I am. It says nothing. It simply is. And somehow that is enough, more than enough. It is the end of seeking, the end of pretending, the end of the mask, and the beginning of something so old it has no name, so close it cannot be found, so true it needs no defence, only this. In the forest of the mind there is a path that vanishes the moment it is followed, a trail that folds behind each step, leaving no trace. The more one searches for the self, the more it slips away, like fog retreating before the dawn. It was never meant to be found, only noticed, not as an object, but as the stillness in which all objects appear. A tree cannot see its own bark, a flame cannot burn its own smoke, and the self cannot see itself as a thing among things, because it is the space through which all things are known. The illusion lies in the effort, the strain to define, to capture, to declare, this is who I am. But identity, when grasped, becomes rigid. It hardens into defense, into posture, into fear. And fear breeds more story. I must be seen. I must be loved. I must be right. Yet these stories are shadows, cast by the light of awareness. The shadows dance, but the light remains. It does not change with mood. It does not shift with belief. It does not flicker when praised or dim when forgotten. It simply shines, quietly, patiently, always. In the soft glow of that truth, something strange happens. The need to be someone softens. The need to prove, to explain, to justify, fades. The self becomes like breath, present, invisible, unclaimed. There is no one breathing the breath. There is only breathing. And in the same way, there is no one living the life. There is only living. The Taoists spoke of this in riddles of water flowing without effort, of wind blowing without intent. They saw the self not as the controller, but as the movement itself, a current in the river, a flame in the fire, a song with no singer. And when this is understood, not with thought but with silence, the weight of identity begins to fall away, slowly, gently. Like petals drifting from a tree, nothing is lost, only the illusion of possession, only the need to name. The mystics called this emptiness, but not a lack, not a void, a fullness too vast for shape, too alive for borders, the kind of emptiness that holds everything. Joy, sorrow, memory, wonder, and within it, a peace that does not depend on outcome, that does not change with the weather of the mind. That simply is. This peace cannot be described. It can only be rested in. Like lying in grass beneath stars, like hearing a loved voice after silence, it is familiar and new, simple and profound, and it whispers, without sound, that there was never anything to fix, never anything missing, only a forgetting, only a dream, the dream of separation, of identity, of me and not me. And now the dream begins to fade, not suddenly, not completely, but gently. A little more space between thoughts, a little less grip on belief, a little more softness in the way the world is seen. The self, once held so tightly, now rests like a feather on the palm, light, fleeting, beautiful. And behind it, the stillness watches, not coldly, not indifferently, lovingly, with the kind of love that needs nothing in return, that asks for no name, that simply holds. And so the path continues, though there is nowhere to go. The river flows, though there is no destination. The breath moves, though no one commands it, and the self, once thought to be a center, is revealed to be a doorway. Opening, opening, opening. Some truths arrive like thunder, others drift in like dust. This one comes like nightfall, quiet, inevitable, softening the edges of all things. It does not demand belief, it does not shout, it settles, it waits, it has always waited, just beneath the noise, just beneath the need. The self, that old illusion, begins to glow translucent in the dark. Not gone, not broken, just no longer mistaken for the whole. A memory, once worn like armour, now hangs loosely like cloth. A name once shouted through the world, now echoes more softly. Even desire begins to bend, no longer toward possession, but toward stillness. The philosopher Meister Eckhart said the soul grows, not by addition, but by subtraction. And so the subtracting continues, the masks fall, the stories loosen, the mirror no longer asks for answers, and in that space, something ancient rises, something quiet, something that does not need to be called anything at all. It is not found by trying, it is revealed by resting. The trees outside do not name themselves, yet they stand. The stars above do not explain their light, yet they shine. So too with this presence, this watching, this quiet flame behind the ribs. It has no beginning, no end. It is the same now as it was when the first breath came, as it will be when the last breath leaves. It is the witness to all changes, yet it changes not. And in this realization, the great effort finally ceases. The chasing ends, the defending ends, the pretending ends. What remains is simple: a seeing, a being, a stillness. The paradox has done its work. It pointed not to knowledge but to freedom, not to new identity but to no identity. And this emptiness is not cold, it is not despair, it is warm, expansive, free of grasping, full of light. The mystics who tasted this did not build temples. They sat in silence, they watched the clouds. They let the rain fall on their skin without name. They understood that to know the self is to forget it, to let it dissolve into what always was. The quiet, the openness, the now. No longer bound to the old thought, I am this. No longer chained to the old fear, I must become that. Instead, a soft surrender to the truth that needs no defense, that cannot be spoken, but only lived. The breath continues, the world moves, the body walks, but the burden is gone. The story still tells itself, but it is not believed. The name still echoes, but it no longer defines. The mask still fits, but it is worn lightly, like costume, like wind. And behind it all the light watches. It does not dim, it does not sleep, it does not speak, but it sees. And in that seeing, everything is held, gently, lovingly, forever. The story just told has now come to its close, a thread gently tied, its images and ideas already sinking into the quieter layers of thought. Yet for those whose minds still drift wakefully, another story begins, one drawn from the ancient words of Lao Tzu, the sage of the Tao, whose voice, though separated from us by centuries, still flows like a river through the valleys of time. In the Tao Te Ching, among its spare and winding verses, lies a paradox both delicate and immense, that the softest thing in the world, water, can overcome the hardest. The line is simple, almost small enough to miss, yet it holds the weight of a truth seen through long observation. Water yielding to every shape, bending without resistance, never grasping or striking, wears down stone, slips past obstacles, finds its way where nothing else can pass. To Lao Tzu, this was not a mere observation of nature, but a mirror held to the nature of life, a lesson in patience, resilience, and the quiet strength of what does not contend. The world is full of hardness, rigid thoughts, fixed wills, walls built against change. These, like stone, seem unshakable. Yet water, soft and persistent, seeps into every crack, moves without hurry, and in time reshapes the unmovable. It wins not through force, but through its refusal to be forced. In the stillness of night, one might hear the faint trickle of a stream, or recall the sound of rain against the earth, and know in that sound the presence of something that does not fight, yet cannot be stopped. Lao Tzu's teaching is not a call to weakness, but to a strength that appears in the form of yielding, to a wisdom that sees the futility of rigid struggle, and instead flows around the obstacle, patient enough to wait for the moment when the obstacle itself is changed. Just as water is clear and without fixed form, so the mind freed from clinging can move through the hardness of life without breaking. This is not the strength of a clenched fist, but the strength of open hands, not the shout, but the quiet persistence that endures beyond the noise. In this way, the soft can overcome the hard, and the gentle can master the unyielding, not by defiance, but by a deeper accord with the way of things. In the landscapes Lao Tzu knew, rivers carved valleys over centuries, rain polished mountains into rounded hills, and the sea, without rising in anger, swallowed stone cliffs grain by grain. He saw in these quiet movements a way of being that did not exhaust itself in battles for control. Water never seeks to dominate the stone, yet in the patient arithmetic of time, the stone changes and the water remains. To grasp this is to see that strength does not always declare itself loudly. A rigid branch may snap in the storm, but the reed bends and survives. In human life, hardness often appears as stubborn will, the refusal to yield an inch, the insistence on victory by direct confrontation. This can win a day, a year, even a decade, but like the stone, it must eventually meet something it cannot break. Softness, by contrast, can seem like loss, like giving way, yet when it is guided by purpose, it becomes a force the hard cannot resist. To yield is not to surrender one's nature, it is to preserve it so that it may continue to act. Lao Tzu's water is not passive, for it moves ceaselessly, shaping the course of its own path. It does not cling to the bank it leaves behind, nor resist the turn ahead. It teaches that resilience is not the same as resistance, and that survival often belongs to what can transform without losing itself. In the human mind, water's way becomes a discipline of letting go, of refusing the tightness that closes off new routes, of trusting that forward movement can happen without force. It asks for trust in the unseen work of time, for faith that slow change is still change. In the candle's soft light, one can imagine the long patience of water in a world of stone, moving where there is space, waiting where there is not, knowing that nothing hard can stand forever against what flows without end. The candle gutters and steadies, the room breathing with a small hush of night air, while the mind turns again to the old pages where water is praised for going to the places others avoid. Low, quiet, unclaimed, useful to all and rival to none. Lao Tzu, a figure hovering at the edge of history, perhaps 6th century before the Common Era, perhaps later, a librarian or a recluse or a road traveller who handed a border guard the verses before vanishing, speaks through the compact brightness of the Tao Te Ching, where the highest goodness is likened to water, because it nourishes without demanding, because it does not contend, because it flows to the valley where pride does not dwell. What does it mean to go low and yet to rise? What does it mean to be soft and yet to overcome? A river answers without speech, shaping stone by patience, widening its banks not by decree but by return, again and again, until resistance becomes a curve and not a wall. The sage reads the river as others read a law code, tracing the clauses of motion in every bend, learning that timing is a deeper strength than force, that placement is a subtler power than pressure. A leader who stands above becomes a peak that the clouds pass without touching, but a leader who stands below becomes the sea, gathering all streams, directing without the roughness of command, governing by yielding, receiving by lowering, guiding by being guided. How can one be guided while guiding, and yet not lose direction? The answer moves like silt falling through clear water after the splash is done, a slow settling that reveals the riverbed again, the shape that was there all along, only hidden by turbulence. In the text, the way is not a plan, but a path already present, the current already moving. The art lies in feeling how to float within it, when to paddle, when to drift, when to slip sideways into a smaller channel that avoids the fallen tree. Water keeps no hard memory of the rock it met at dawn. It continues. It takes the next line of least resistance, not from fear, but from clarity, not from weakness, but from the recognition that the goal is distance, not drama. The body understands this teaching before the tongue can phrase it, for blood remembers its rounds, lymph makes its silent passages, tears come and go with their salt, and each breath arrives like a small tide that gathers what must be released and leaves what must remain. The mind which loves to strike can instead dissolve, letting a knot loosen by absence of pulling, letting a word emerge when it has ripened rather than when a moment demands a show of strength. What is a knot to water but a pattern that will unmake itself if soaked long enough, if left in the patient bath of attention? In the cliffside temple courtyards of memory, The rain falls for ages on bronze bells and tiled eaves, and the patina that forms is not a wound but a blessing, a softening that time writes as praise for what endures without shouting. The sage watches a torrent and a trickle and sees the same principle. That flow is invincible because it refuses to become a single hard shape, because change is not its enemy but its native tongue. Why chase confrontation when redirection will do? Why push a door inward when it will open outward for a lighter hand? Why harden a face when a pause will cool the heat and make the right sentence possible? The stone speaks only in weight, the water speaks in roots, and roots win. To live as water lives is not to resign, it is to reserve energy for what requires it. To avoid paying the cost of pride for small victories that soon become large regrets, to attend to the landscape rather than the score. The text praises emptiness, not as lack but as capacity. The cup useful because it is hollow. The room useful because it holds unfilled air. The valley rich because it receives what the mountain sheds. The sea lord of streams because it is lower than all. What is low but a promise to carry? What is empty but a promise to welcome? In the palace of strategies, this is scandalous counsel, yet history confirms it quietly, for empires that stiffen break on their own corners, while customs that bend with new times endure like reed mats renewed with each season, altered yet the same. The lesson hides in ordinary hours. A pot over flames that are too fierce cracks, a pot over steady coals cooks through. A letter sent in, anger becomes a sharp pebble in the shoe of years. A letter sent after sleep becomes a clear path, seen in morning light. A schedule packed to its lips spills. A schedule with a hollow at its centre becomes a basin that catches what chance pours in. Water does not think of winning, yet it arrives. It does not promise, yet it keeps going. It does not declare, yet it shapes. Is there a gentler power? The page closes and opens again in the mind, and the small candle offers a living commentary, for the flame achieves its task by consuming itself at a pace that does not rush, for haste would be the speed of loss, while measure is the rhythm of service. Patience is not delay for its own sake, it is alignment with what can be done now, and what must be done by hours that have not yet arrived. It is the wisdom to let time work alongside effort, so that effort is not alone. Resilience is not a helmet, it is a spring, not a wall. It is a curve that returns to form after strain. It is a way of continuing that does not require defiance to prove itself. The night listens as the thought finishes its circle. The sage remains elsewhere, or everywhere, saying almost nothing, asking whether hardness truly secures what it tries to protect, inviting the experiment of softness practiced long enough to become unanswerable. A last question ripples through the quiet. When stone is remembered centuries from now, will the memory be the crack or the curve the water left behind? And which of these tells the truer story of strength? Night settles more deeply, and the mind drifts with it, carrying the image of a river through darkness, silvered under moonlight, moving without hurry toward a destination unseen. Lao Tzu's image of water is not a metaphor invented for comfort, but an observation repeated through the centuries, a truth that belongs to the earth as much as to the text. Water is the master of adaptation. It takes the shape of the cup without argument, fills the hollow of the land without condition, and yet, over seasons and centuries, it sculpts entire continents. In the Tao Te Ching, it is written that nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard. The paradox is real because it refuses the usual meaning of strength. In the human mind, strength is often imagined as dominance, the ability to force one's will upon others or upon circumstance. But water teaches that lasting influence comes not from domination, but from endurance, from the quiet persistence that outlives the momentary blaze of force. Watch the river in flood, and you see its temporary violence, but watch it in its ordinary state, and you see its true nature, patient, unceasing, willing to travel the long road rather than claim an immediate victory. To live as water lives is to accept that the world resists the straight line. Rocks will rise, banks will narrow, fallen branches will block the way, and the impatient will turn to frustration. But water turns to finding another path. It curves where it must curve. It pauses in pools where it must rest. It even retreats when the tide draws it back, trusting that it will return again. This is not resignation. It is the wisdom of knowing that the goal is not to win today, but to keep moving for as long as there is movement to make. The sage, observing this, learns to measure time not in days or hours, but in seasons and cycles. An insult received may be answered in silence, not from weakness, but because the answer is already being shaped by patience. A setback may be met with a change in direction rather than a collision with the obstacle. To be soft in this way is to place faith in transformation rather than in confrontation. The stone, after all, is unchanged after the first drop of rain, and perhaps even after 100, but in the length of years it is worn smooth, its edges rounded, its face carved. Water has no memory for revenge, but it remembers its purpose. In the same way, the mind that flows with the Tao does not hoard bitterness or pride. It holds to its direction and allows the rest to dissolve. And there is another layer to water's strength, its humility. It seeks the lowest places. It does not rush to the heights but flows down into the valleys, into the shadowed hollows where others will not go. In this humility, it gathers all the streams, uniting them into a greater whole. The sea, said Lao Tzu, is king of the 100 streams because it lies below them. This is not the humility of self-erasure, but the humility of inclusion, the kind that creates space for others to join without fear. Those who wish to lead without force can learn here, to lead like the sea, by receiving, by making room, by letting others flow toward you rather than pushing them from behind. There is a peace in this, and a power. One can see it in the way water reflects without holding, mirrors without judgment, carries without ownership. The sky may pass across it in clouds or in stars, and water holds both images in turn, never confusing them with itself. A person who can be like this, clear enough to reflect yet calm enough not to cling, becomes as untouchable as the river's heart, for they cannot be disturbed beyond the ripples that fade in their own time. It is easy to admire the torrent, the waterfall, the dramatic rush of water over a precipice, but Lao Tzu's teaching is to admire also the unseen work of water, the slow seep into stone, the hidden flow beneath the soil, the quiet accumulation of drops that will one day wear a channel through the hardest ground. In the long night, as the candle burns lower, this truth feels close. Strength is not the clenched jaw, the raised voice, the unyielding demand. Strength is the silent shaping, the slow approach, the resilience that does not announce itself, but is found still flowing when everything else has stopped. And so the river moves on, and so should the heart. The night deepens, and the quiet becomes a vast plain, unbroken, except for the steady pulse of thought moving like a hidden stream under the surface. The mind returns to Lao Tzu's image, that nothing is softer than water, and yet it conquers the unyielding. To feel this is to see the distinction between speed and duration, between the sharpness of a moment and the depth of a lifetime. A blade can cut once and then dull. A hammer can strike and then rest. But water moves without ceasing, and its ceaselessness is its edge. The Tao Te Ching does not speak of victory in the language of battles, but in the language of seasons. It trusts what is repeated over time more than what is imposed in an instant. The heart of this wisdom is patience, not the patience of waiting passively, but the patience of acting in alignment with the rhythms of the world, knowing that resistance consumes itself faster than endurance does. The river does not push the boulder head on, for that would only exhaust its force in a single, futile moment. Instead, it slides past, finding the spaces, wearing the edges, until the stone is no longer an obstacle, but part of the path. It is a truth both simple and difficult, to remain in motion without clinging to the need to arrive, to understand that the journey is not the means to an end, but the end itself unfolding in each bend, each ripple. To live like water is to accept the shape the moment offers without becoming trapped by it. When a vessel is narrow, water becomes narrow. When a basin is wide, water spreads without resistance. In human life, this is the art of adjusting without losing essence, of bending without breaking, of being shaped by circumstance, while still carrying forward the same quiet direction. Many fear that such yielding is a kind of defeat, but it is in truth the avoidance of unnecessary loss. For what is lost in rigidity cannot be regained, but what is preserved through flexibility may be used again and again. Water also teaches humility, the choice to seek the low ground, the willingness to go where others will not go, not because it lacks ambition, but because it understands that the low ground receives all streams. This is the humility of listening more than speaking, of absorbing rather than resisting, of learning without the armor of pride. In leadership, it is the humility that unites, for those who would be followed must first make space for others to come to them. Lao Tzu saw the sea as the great master, because it lies beneath the rivers, allowing them to flow into it freely. This is a leadership without force, a gathering of strength through reception rather than through demand. In relationships, the waterway is the choice to hold without gripping, to offer space without absence, to reflect without distortion. Water mirrors the sky without keeping its image. So too can one receive the words, the emotions, the presence of another without turning them into possessions. This is a rare kind of strength, for it cannot be taken by threat nor diminished by insult. And water's lesson is not only in movement, but in stillness. A river flows, yet there are moments when it pools into deep quiet, the surface smooth as glass, holding the world's image without a sound. Such stillness is not the absence of life, but its concentration, a readiness to move again when the time is right. In the same way, there are seasons in which the wise do not press forward, but rest, gather, and deepen. Stillness allows clarity to return. It lets the silt of confusion settle so the bottom can be seen again. In the rush to act, many lose their way, but in the pause, the next step often reveals itself without effort. Water also accepts transformation without fear. It becomes vapor in the sun's warmth, mist in the morning cool, ice in the mountain shadow, and returns again to liquid without clinging to any state as final. This is the great teaching for a human life, to change form when change is needed, without resisting the return to a previous form when the time calls for it. Nothing in water says permanence is the measure of truth. Instead, it says that continuity through change is the real constant. To follow this is to be free from the terror of endings, for every ending in water is only a movement to another place, another shape, another chance to flow. And so in the deep hours, the image of water remains, soft, patient, unbroken, not because it refuses to meet what is hard, but because it knows it has no need to struggle. The hard breaks itself, the soft simply endures, and in the end, it is endurance that shapes the world. The mind drifts further into the dim corridors of thought, where the sound of water becomes not only a sound, but a presence, a reminder that all things move toward transformation. Lao Tzu's vision of water is not simply a poetic device, but a framework for living, a method of aligning with the inevitable rather than opposing it. In his teaching, the soft conquers the hard because the soft refuses the single moment of victory. It plays instead for the endless game, where time is the true ally. Stone may resist for years, even centuries, but water's persistence is a promise that cannot be broken. The lesson moves quietly into the heart. One does not have to win today to shape tomorrow. This is the art of slow triumph, the patience that outlives resistance by outlasting it. And yet, water is not only patient, it is deliberate. Every curve of a river's path is the result of countless decisions, some swift, some subtle, made by its own flowing body as it meets the contours of the world. It does not argue with the cliff, it turns. It does not curse the fallen tree, it passes beneath. It does not resent the drought, it waits in the cool earth until the rains return. To live as water is to become untroubled by the need to control the form of the path, for the path is never truly fixed. The strength is in the movement itself, in refusing to become still out of fear of change. And in this refusal, there is a deeper truth, that surrender is not always loss, and control is not always gain. By yielding, water gains access to every space. By insisting on its shape, it would lose most. In the human spirit, this becomes the practice of entering situations with openness rather than rigidity, allowing oneself to be shaped by the experience without being consumed by it. Yet water's humility hides its immense capacity for power. It may begin as a trickle, gentle enough to pass unnoticed, but with time it gathers, it swells, it becomes a current that can sweep away what once seemed immovable. This is why the sage values the low ground. There, in the place where nothing seeks to stand tall, all things eventually meet. The low ground is the meeting point of rivers, the resting place of rain, the foundation upon which the mountains drain themselves. In human life, the low ground is found in listening, in observation, in the quiet to taking in of what others offer without immediate need to respond or display. This gathering is not passive, it is preparation. For when the moment comes to act, one acts from abundance rather than emptiness. The sea is the king of streams because it lies beneath them, Lao Tzu writes. To lie beneath is to choose the position of reception rather than dominance, to let others come of their own will. This is the power of the one who does not chase but attracts, who does not demand loyalty but inspires it. And still, there is a gentleness that remains unbroken even in water's greatest force. The waves that batter the shore also carry life to it. The flood that reshapes the land leaves behind fertile soil. In the human soul, the equivalent is a firmness of principle that does not lose kindness, an ability to stand without cruelty. To be like water is to refuse the belief that one must harm to remain strong. There is also the teaching of reflection. Clear water mirrors the world without holding it, and in this, it teaches detachment. The sky's passing clouds, the moon's changing face, the faces of those who stand at the bank, all are held for a moment, then released. So should the mind hold its experiences, seen, known, and then allowed to pass without binding them to the self. This is not forgetfulness, but freedom from possession. And perhaps the most subtle teaching of water is its acceptance of cycles. It evaporates into the unseen sky, becomes cloud, returns as rain, gathers again into streams, never fearing that leaving its current form is the end. In human life, every loss is a change of form, every ending a return to another beginning. The sage does not cling to what must transform, for the same river is never the same river, yet it is always the river. The night grows deeper still, and the flow of thought becomes indistinguishable from the flow of water itself, quiet, steady, certain that it will continue long after the listener's eyes close and the dream begins. In the stillness of thought, water becomes not only an element, but a principle that reaches into the core of human conduct. Lao Tzu saw in its quiet endurance a truth that words often fail to hold. The world is not conquered by those who push hardest, but by those who cannot be pushed aside. The stone resists once, twice, perhaps 100 times, but resistance is finite. Endurance has no such limit. Water does not exhaust itself in the act of overcoming. It overcomes by continuing. And in that continuation lies a subtle form of wisdom, one that does not see victory as a single, shining moment, but as a quiet inevitability that unfolds without the noise of battle. This is why the sage learns to value time as a companion rather than an enemy. Time, like water, wears down all that is fixed and unbending, but it also nourishes all that is willing to grow. To be in harmony with time is to refuse the false urgency of forcing outcomes before they are ready. To understand that the ripest fruit will fall without effort, that the seed beneath the soil already knows its way upward. Yet water's teaching is not passivity. It moves, always moves, shaping the land, feeding the roots, carrying life from one place to another. Even when it appears still, there is movement beneath, currents invisible to the eye, but strong enough to shift the bed of the river. So it is with the inner life. The most profound transformations often occur in the depths, where no one is looking. To cultivate such depth is to live without needing the constant approval of the surface world, to find strength in the unseen work that will, in time, emerge naturally. In this, water teaches the discipline of self-containment. It does not boast of where it has been or where it will go. It simply flows toward its purpose. And purpose for water is not a fixed point but a state of being. The river does not dream of the sea, it moves toward it because that is what it is. In human terms, this is to act in accordance with one's nature, not in pursuit of an image or reward. When action is aligned with nature, there is no exhaustion from pretending, no weariness from holding a shape that is not one's own. Water's humility is another part of its strength. It does not seek the highest place but finds the lowest, not out of shame, but because the lowest place is the gathering place. There streams unite. There life thrives. Lao Tzu saw that a ruler who holds himself low becomes the meeting point for his people, and a person who lowers pride becomes a friend to all. Humility is not weakness but access. It is the opening through which all things may pass. In the way of water, pride is a dam, and humility the open channel. And water's patience is not without its moments of sudden transformation. There are times when a river swells into a flood, when the quiet accumulation becomes an unstoppable surge. In life, this is the moment when long preparation meets the right conditions, when years of quiet work produce a single, undeniable movement. The flood is not reckless, it is the release of what was already stored. And when the force is spent, water returns to stillness, without regret for its brief display of power. This is a strength rare in the world, knowing when to act with full force and when to return to the quiet flow. Water also teaches transparency. It holds no secrets for itself, yet it conceals depths to those who look without truly seeing. In its clarity, it reflects the world faithfully. In its depth, it holds mysteries. This is the balance the sage seeks: openness without vulnerability to harm, depth without the need for display. And perhaps the most comforting of water's lessons is its inevitability. It will reach the sea, whether in days or decades, whether as a river, a stream, or a cloud returning as rain. There is no doubt in its journey, only the calm certainty of arrival. For a human life, this is the trust that one's path, if walked with constancy, will arrive where it must, without the strain of forcing each step. The night listens to these truths as a sleeper listens to the rain, not needing to grasp each drop, only to feel the rhythm that has no beginning and no end. And in that rhythm, the soul finds its own reflection, soft, patient, enduring. There is an ancient scene, imagined yet true, in which Lao Tzu sits by the edge of a slow-moving stream, his robes gathered loosely, the air scented with pine, and the quiet sweetness of distant blossoms. He does not speak at first, for the water is already teaching, and he listens as one listens to an elder. The stream glides past, carrying leaves that turn in gentle spirals, their movements directed not by will, but by the unhurried certainty of the current. Here he observes what many fail to see. Water does not compete, yet nothing can rival its persistence. It does not shout, yet Its voice is heard by mountains and valleys alike. It does not resist, yet its path cannot be stopped. This is not only poetry, it is instruction for the human spirit. Life often presses the mind to harden, to defend, to meet force with greater force. But Lao Tzu's water reveals that the greater mastery is in avoiding the trap of direct collision. When the path is blocked, water bends. When confined, it finds the smallest opening. When pressed downward, it gains momentum. When lifted to the sky, it waits until it can fall again. In this lies the art of transforming what is given into what is needed. The sage learns to make use of the obstacles, to see in each constraint the chance to move differently, to let the shape of the challenge guide the shape of the response. And yet, water's way is not an excuse for inaction. Its patience is active. It is a patience that never ceases to work. Even the smallest drip, allowed enough time, can pierce stone. Even the gentlest wave, given enough repetition, can alter the shape of the shore. This is a reminder that progress is not always visible in the moment, that the most enduring changes are often invisible until they are complete. The heart that adopts water's pace learns not to demand immediate results, for it understands that the present moment is only a fragment of the whole journey. The mind too can be like a river, clear when it allows thought to flow freely, muddy when it clings to what it should release. When the mind is clear, it reflects truth without distortion, like still water beneath a moonlit sky. When agitated, it loses its depth, and even the brightest light cannot be seen within it. Thus, to live like water is to cultivate a calm within, not as a withdrawal from life, but as a condition for engaging with it fully. This calm is not broken by passing storms, for storms too are part of the great cycle. They churn the surface but cannot reach the deep currents below. Lao Tzu's teachings suggest that the soul should live in those deeper currents, steady and untroubled, letting the surface do as it must. There is also a quiet nobility in the way water nourishes without seeking recognition. It gives itself to roots and seeds without claiming ownership of the growth. It refreshes the weary without asking for thanks. In this, water becomes a model for generosity, offering without expectation, aiding without claiming credit. True virtue, in Lao Tzu's vision, is like this: unseen, unrecorded, yet essential to all life. And still, the paradox remains that water's gentleness is the very source of its strength. The sword is proud of its sharpness, but it dulls. The rock boasts of its weight, but it crumbles. The fire burns brightly, but it consumes itself. Water endures because it does not insist on being what it is not. It does not oppose the truth of its own nature. In this, there is a profound invitation to self-acceptance, to live in a way that does not fight one's essence, to be shaped without losing the core of who one is. And perhaps most profound of all is water's lesson of return. No matter how far it travels, it is always on its way back to the sea, its vast home where all rivers meet. In the same way, the human spirit, through countless changes of form and place, moves toward its own vastness, its own unbroken source. There is comfort in knowing that no detour is wasted, no delay permanent. All that moves with sincerity arrives. And so the night holds this thought as the stream outside continues its endless journey, whispering to the stones, to the trees, to the one who listens in stillness, that the way forward is not in force, but in flow, not in holding on, but in letting go, not in speed, but in the certainty of return. In the quiet reach of night, the image of water deepens into a mirror for the human soul, showing that softness is not the absence of power, but its most enduring form. Lao Tzu understood this in a way that was more than metaphor. He saw it in the valleys where rivers had carved their way through ancient stone, in the delicate persistence of rain that, drop by drop, reshaped the face of the earth. The lesson was clear. What yields can also prevail. What bends can outlast what refuses to move. This truth unsettles the mind, trained to think in terms of dominance, of winning by strength alone, for it suggests that victory can be silent, almost invisible, and still absolute. The sage sees in this not a contradiction, but a deeper harmony, a reminder that power and gentleness are not enemies. To live like water is to resist the temptation to meet every challenge with direct opposition. It is to understand that the straightest line is not always the best path, that sometimes the way forward is found by flowing around the obstacle rather than breaking it apart. Water knows no impatience. It does not rush to overcome, nor does it despair when blocked. Instead, it trusts the quiet mathematics of time, the slow inevitability of its nature. And time for water is not an adversary, but a companion. In human life, this translates to an acceptance that not all things can or should be forced into the present moment, that some transformations can only be completed through the unhurried accumulation of days and seasons. Yet water is never still in its essence. Even in the calmest pool, there are movements too subtle for the eye to catch. Tiny currents shifting, life sustained below the surface. This hidden activity is a reminder that patience is not idleness, that stillness can contain its own quiet work. For the one who listens, this suggests a way of living in which effort is steady and continuous, but never frantic, where change is pursued without the strain of desperation. Water also teaches humility by seeking the lowest places, not out of shame, but because these are the gathering places, the points where streams unite. Lao Tzu knew that a person who can dwell in humility becomes a point of connection, a meeting ground for others, a source of nourishment and support. Pride stands apart and alone. Humility gathers and multiplies. In this way, lowering oneself becomes a form of strength, a way of holding more rather than less. And water's humility is not weakness, for it can rise as vapor, move with the wind, fall again as rain. It is always willing to change its form, to adapt without losing its essence. In human terms, this is the courage to let go of rigid identities, to allow oneself to be shaped by circumstances without being broken by them. Such adaptability is not a betrayal of self, but a return to the core of one's nature. For just as water is water, whether in river, cloud or snow, a person remains themselves through all transformations if they remain true to their essence. Water also holds the lesson of clarity. A clear stream reflects the sky perfectly, but when stirred by violence, it becomes opaque, its depths hidden. So too the mind, which can only reflect truth when it is calm. Anger, fear, and agitation cloud it, making even the simplest truths difficult to see. To live like water is to cultivate a mind that clears quickly, that allows disturbances to pass through without clinging to them. Such clarity is not constant perfection, it is the ability to return to transparency again and again. And in the moments when water swells into flood, when its force is suddenly visible and irresistible, it shows that gentleness does not mean weakness, that patience does not mean passivity. When the conditions are right, when the moment has ripened, water moves with unstoppable force, sweeping away what was thought immovable. The wise person too knows when to act decisively after long preparation, when to let stored potential become a single, transformative act. Yet when the surge is over, water returns to its quiet flow, without clinging to its moment of power, without seeking to preserve it. This is the rhythm of life well lived, times of stillness, times of movement, each with their place, each flowing naturally into the other. And so in the dim candlelight, the lesson of water becomes more than words. It becomes a presence, a way of breathing and being. It asks nothing, demands nothing, only invites the listener to soften, to endure, to flow, to trust that the path will lead where it must, not through force, but through the inevitability of what cannot be stopped. In this, the heart begins to understand what the mountains have always known, that even the hardest stone must one day bow to the gentlest touch, repeated without end. The moon hangs low over the still surface of a hidden lake, silver lights scattered across the ripples where a breeze has touched the water and moved on. In this quiet, Lao Tzu's thought takes shape, not as a rigid doctrine, but as something living, flowing, breathing. Water is his teacher, his metaphor, his mirror. In its patience, he sees the futility of haste. In its humility, he sees the power of yielding. And in its unbroken persistence, he sees the inevitability of transformation. The mountains believe themselves eternal, yet the streams carve their faces with patient hands. The walls built by human ambition crumble where rain seeps into their smallest cracks. Time favours the gentle, not because it is sentimental, but because gentleness works in harmony with its long cycles, never exhausting itself in the illusion of control. A person who understands this no longer measures progress in sudden victories, but in the subtle shifts that unfold quietly and without announcement. Water teaches that one need not always push forward. Sometimes it is wiser to wait, to let the terrain reveal its openings, to let gravity do the work. And yet this waiting is not the waiting of passivity. It is the waiting of a seed before spring, alive with hidden growth. Even the softest drop wears away the stone, not by force but by returning, again and again, unchanged in its intent. Lao Tzu saw that a life lived in such a way becomes unshakable. No insult can wound it deeply, for it flows past. No obstacle can hold it forever, for it finds another way. No loss can destroy it, for it knows the sea awaits at the end of every journey. This way of being is neither resistance nor surrender, but a deeper synthesis where one chooses the form of surrender that becomes its own kind of resistance. In the stillness of water, there is also a lesson about reflection. When undisturbed, it reveals what stands above it with perfect clarity. The human mind too is capable of such clarity, but only when it is allowed to settle, when the storms of emotion have been given time to pass. Clarity cannot be forced. It arrives naturally when the agitation is released. To see truly, one must learn to let the sediment of thought sink to the depths until the surface shines like a mirror. And yet water is not afraid to be stirred, for it knows the sediment will settle again. There is no fear of change in its nature, no desperate clinging to form. A river is not less itself when it becomes mist, nor when the mist becomes rain. The essence remains even as the shape shifts. This is the freedom that comes from self-knowledge, the understanding that identity is not bound to one moment, one role, one appearance. When the mind adopts this fluidity, life's transitions no longer appear as threats but as natural phases of the same unbroken current. In its giving, water teaches a final quiet truth. It nourishes without discrimination, flowing equally to the just and the unjust, the beautiful and the decayed. It asks for nothing in return. This is the highest form of generosity, one that gives not because of obligation or desire for recognition, but because giving is simply its way of being. A life shaped in this image finds its own fulfillment in the act itself, not in the reward. The candle on the low table flickers as a breath of night air slips into the room, and the listener can almost hear the voice of that ancient sage. Not as a command, but as a suggestion. Be like water. Let strength be hidden within gentleness. Let movement be guided by the path that opens before you. Let your persistence be so natural that even you forget you're enduring. When the world becomes hard and unyielding, do not try to match it blow for blow. Flow into the spaces it leaves unguarded. And when joy or sorrow rise suddenly like a flood, let them pass without grasping. Return to your calm channel, to the deep and steady current that cannot be seen from the surface. In this way, the heart learns not only to survive but to prevail, not by winning but by outlasting, not by dominating but by transforming. For in the end, all things return to the sea, and the sea waits for nothing yet receives everything.